Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the lovely Zammar Ahmer. How are you?
I am very good. It's a beautiful Sunday night. It's kind of gloomy out today, but I
Yeah.
like that. I like that weather. Like kind of a bit overcast, bit foggy. Just relax at home. I had a great Sunday. How was yours?
Nice. It was absolutely wonderful. We had the same kind of weather. I don't think we're that far off in terms of location-wise. So we
Yeah.
had similar kind of gloomy day, but we had a really weird sunset. I don't know if you had
Oh yeah.
that as well. It was almost apocalyptic in a way. We
Ooh.
had the gloominess, but we had some of that pink sunset color going through. So
Yeah.
everywhere outside had a reddish, pinkish hue to it.
Yeah.
It was weird and off-putting at first.
If you read my book, then you know I'm all about the sunset scenery.
Yes,
So
yes. Maybe that's when you can throw in as like a ominous reddish pink
mhm,
hue for the next one. So
yeah.
speaking of, could you introduce yourself and your books for everyone watching?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Zammar Ahmer. To be honest, I don't really know how to say my name. Everyone says it differently, including everyone in my family. But
Okay.
first name Zammar. So I debuted earlier this year with this book here, Riven Earth. And then it followed it up. So it's part of a duology. And this is Sundered Moon. So it's the Book of Estea duology. And yeah, I mean, it's essentially just, it's epic fantasy. I think it's a little bit grim dark, probably a bit darker in book two than book one. Okay, if you've read the book, so you may or may not agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say book two definitely goes darker.
Yeah, alternate universe where there's nature magic, there's fire swords, there's people with a lot of issues trying to deal with those issues. And yeah, I'd like to think it's a very character driven story. Try to put in some really unique world building in there as well. And yeah, I mean, so far I've been really enjoying just the welcome to the fantasy community. Like the indie fantasy community is such a great place to be. It's so wholesome. And yeah, my first, I guess it's almost been half a year since I debuted, and it's been awesome. So
That's been I love hearing that. I love hearing that the experience has been positive because it is such an amazing community in that regards and supportive. And
mhm.
we have Joe here with us, JCM Byrne, who is
Hey
also
Joe.
a author. Go check out the Hybrid Helix series, folks, because if you've watched, you know.
Yeah. Joe is so cool. I can't wait to read his books.
They're so good. I think you would
Yeah,
really enjoy them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm
Yeah.
very enthused.
Rohan's character is probably the most fascinating for me.
Mhm, mhm.
He just becomes more layered the more you read. So let's talk about your books. So if you were to pick out your ideal reader audience, who would you say is most likely to pick up the Book of Estea duology?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to go about that is to talk about other authors that
Yeah,
are
by all
well
means.
known, right? So, I mean, for what it's worth, like my favorite author is Joe Abercrombie,
Mm.
by a wide margin. I love Robin Hobb. Um, Recently, I've read Scott Lynch and a few others, but I think when I was writing these books, I was very Brandon Sanderson inspired as well. So I think fans of that kind of stuff, where it is grim dark to a large degree, but it's also kind of heroic,
Mm.
where it's not quite as nihilistic as something like Abercrombie. Like I do believe that there are good people out there who try their best to do right, but often they just suck and they can't they can't get it right and they make mistakes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think like people who like that kind of stuff, people who like a very close character close narrative
Mm.
style where I really try to embody each character in terms of prose. Like I try to change the writing style for every character and try to differentiate the book that way. I think that's a very Abercrombie thing to do. So if people like that, and I think there's a few elements of Hobb in there as well, with hopefully a few emotionally powerful moments. I hope.
Yep.
Um,
Still
and
traumatized, yes.
yeah, and yeah, and there's definitely Sanderson inspiration. Not so much in the magic system, because I was kind of not so much of a hard magic, but I think in the way I tried to structure the plot is a little bit Sandersonian, where there's a little bit of a Sanderlanche towards the end and
Mm.
and stuff like that. So So if you like those authors, I think there's a decent chance, I hope, that you'll like my books.
There you go. So, in terms of your own reading, because we're talking about authors that helped inspired your work, what are some of your top reads, whether it's from these authors that you mentioned or different ones?
Yeah, I mean, basically every single thing Joe Abercrombie has written, like he has never
Mm,
missed for me personally.
nice.
Um, like Robin Hobb, again, I love basically all of her series. I think I'm trying to think of good ones from this year. So I really enjoyed the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard
Okay.
Cornwell. I'm a big fan of historical fiction, and there's probably one of my favorite books I've read recently is Blackwater by Michael McDowell. So I'm not sure if
Okay.
you've heard of that one. It's actually, I think it's technically horror, but it's really just a Southern Gothic family drama.
Okay.
And it feels like historical fiction, but the point with it is it's just like this really character focused, very intimate,
Mm,
long spanning piece. Like it just
yeah.
spans like 50 years. You follow this family over a long period of time. You see how the kids are born and the conflicts between mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and all of these things.
Right.
And it just feels very realistic. It feels very um, yeah, just I just love that kind of stuff. Like
Mm,
slow, sometimes even meandering, like just the ability to spend some time with characters is awesome stuff. So
yeah.
really like that. And then sometimes you just want a bit of fun. So that's when, you pick up something like, I don't know, something closer to a Sanderson, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when it comes to that aspect of the meandering, the very humanistic kind of taking a pause and seeing how these characters develop, uh, what is it that you hoped to catch within your own writing to capture with the characters that you wrote? Because you wrote multiple POVs, like you said, you wrote them differently,
Mhm.
and then you take them on. I want to say just brutal journeys. They're up against intense odds. So what was it that you were trying to capture for, and I realize it'll probably be different for each of the characters, but at the end of the day, what were you hoping to capture or recapture with writing those characters and those journeys, seeing as you love that yourself as a reader?
Yeah. Okay. These are hard questions. They're making me think. What was I thinking when I wrote these books?
Came out swinging.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, so I feel like I just wanted to capture a sense of realism,
Mm,
and this is one of those tricky things because I'm not convinced that people like reading realistic characters. I think when you write a very realistic character, it can be it's easy to cross that line into I don't like this character.
right.
It's very very easy. The more realistic those characters are, right? Like for instance, probably the most hated trope in all of fiction is like the miscommunication trope,
Oh,
but
yes.
it is by far the most realistic. Like
Yeah.
in reality, like everyone miscommunicates constantly. Like every conversation is actually just a bunch of miscommunication. No one's on the same page, like ever, right? So,
Yep.
so it's one of those things where you have to try and find that balance. But
Mm,
I, um, when I came up with these stories, they kind of just came to me pretty naturally. I was doing a lot of reading and essentially just key scenes from the books just kept repeating in my head. So before these characters had been born, before this world had been born, I was just thinking of these scenes, and I was like, "Who are these people? Like who is this guy?" That's there. For instance, you'll recognize a scene. But imagine a great battlefield, and a
mm,
bunch of people are dead, and there's just a guy who's crying there, and I'm like, "Who is this guy?" And over time, I'm like, "Oh, that's the king, right? Like this is his fault, and he's crying because he regrets what he's done, right?" And
mm,
then like when those key scenes kept repeating, I sort of built character arcs around them. So how do I get to that scene? Like who is this guy? How did he feel at that moment? And then where does he go from there? And as I kind of went through that process, that's how the characters came to me. They kind of came alive in that sense. And then once I got to just spend some time with them in my head, because like for me, at least 70 to 80% of writing is actually just daydreaming. I'm just like standing around or, I'm in meetings at work and I'm kind of
yeah.
just in my own head thinking
Yeah.
about what's going on in my world. And yeah, so then once I got to know the characters a bit better, it just felt like I wanted to do right by them. So I wanted to capture the essence of what made them real to me is what I
Mm,
wanted to get on the page and to try and translate that, because to me they felt very vivid and real,
right.
and I think the challenge as an author is always getting that across to other people, which is why I like that sort of Joe
Mm,
Abercrombie-ish style where you're very close to the characters. Is if I can change the prose, if I can change the prose to sort of indicate how this character thinks, then I
hmm.
think that makes it a bit more real. It makes him feel like you're more in his head. So
Right.
yeah, that was sort of the objective, I think. I don't
Awesome.
know
So
if I
for you,
answered your
no,
question.
no, absolutely. So for you, it was a matter of to capture that essence. It was playing with the prose, and then taking it from what you had worked out
Yeah,
internally.
yeah, I think so. I'm always a big guy for prose, and it
Mm,
sounds a bit snotty, but I just think that like any old baboon can come up with a story, but to like put it into written words is the
mm,
true art, right? And like
yeah.
there's just so much power in words if you know how to use them right,
Mhm.
which is not something I've mastered by any means, but I think striving to improve in that front and is really beneficial as an
Ah,
author.
absolutely. So I have a follow-up question to that, Joe. I'm sorry, I do see your question. I will get to it. Um, so just in follow-up to that and talking about prose, what helped you develop your prose? What was it that, because this is going to be something different for every author, but I'm really curious how, for you being this being an emphasis in terms of nailing it and really telling your story, how did you go about building that skill as a writer?
uh, I don't know. It's a lot of self torture. It's staring at a sentence and then rewording it like 6 times and being like, which one of these is better? I don't know. Oh my god, which
Oh,
one makes more sense? I
oh
think
no.
I think any writers who join this chat can probably relate to that. Like you
Right.
could just breeze through it. Like it would be easy, just throw words on the page. But then if you go back and you think about every sentence and you're like, can I reword this to be better? Can I reword this to make it feel more like how the character would think it? And stuff like that. And suddenly it's just torture. It's pain. But what I will say is I think editing is what it is. Like
Right.
the difference I think between good and bad prose is just the time spent on improving it is probably the biggest
Okay.
factor.
Okay. Good. Well, we won't linger because we don't want to torture you anymore. So we'll jump into Joe's question here. Non-literary influences, anything from film, TV, comics, or manga that helped influence your work?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Like, I'm a big fan of TV. Less so of movies, to be honest. I like long form dramas. Like my favorite show ever is The West Wing, which I'm not
Okay.
sure if you've heard of, but it's kind of
No.
old now. But I just love that. I guess you would call it a character based, like really snappy, powerful dialogue. Um, for comics and manga, I haven't spent as much time on those. I used to watch a good deal of anime when I was younger, but
Mm,
um, I have a lot of family members who read a lot of manga, so I think I've got like had some osmosis influence from
right.
there. um, but yeah, not in recent times.
Okay. So well, let's go back a little bit then. Back then, what kind of manga or anime did you read or watch? I'm curious because I used to read and watch a lot of that too back in the day. I don't want to say it like that, but back in the day.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've seen like 600 episodes of One Piece for one thing.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
I
What a
know it's
commitment.
popular. Well, this is the thing, right? It's like when I was young, I was into it,
Yeah.
so I was watching it as it came out. And then I think it got to like it's like the Punk Hazard arc. Is
Okay.
about where I caught up, and then I haven't followed on since. So I think that's like far behind now. There's probably another 600 episodes since I stopped watching it. Um,
Right.
and then when I was younger, like Inuyasha,
Yeah.
Naruto, Bleach, like the classics that were playing on YTV.
Yes, I watched those ones too. Although I
Yeah.
will say I think I got like 120 episodes into Naruto and I was just like, "You know what? I can't I can't with the English dub. I cannot."
It was all about the subs, all about the subs.
Yes, exactly.
But
So, yeah.
I think like anime is a pretty cool place to get
Mm.
inspiration for fantasy because you see some wild things happen
Oh,
in
yeah.
it, and it's good to just let that creativity kind of seep into you and
Yeah.
allow you to write that in your books and be a bit free in what you do.
Yeah, and they go historical as well in many of them, right? They'll go back in eras or they'll do a blending of old and modern in their world settings, which was always fascinating too.
Yeah.
And we have Brighton here as well. And Timothy, always good to see you both. Thank you so much for joining. Yes, we have another Inuyasha fan. I didn't realize there was like 12 seasons. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone is familiar, but they actually made a follow-up series called Yasha Hime over the last couple of years, which follows their children. I don't know if anyone's watched it. I
They did
watched a
that for
trailer.
Naruto too, didn't they? I think.
Boruto. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
yeah.
I haven't watched it because I'm nervous touching that nostalgia, you know? I don't wanna mess with that. It was a good thing when it was.
Yeah, yeah, I know the feeling.
Yes. Yeah, so it's, thank you, Brighton, that's really sweet. So, oh no, Timothy. He says
It
it
was
was
blasphemy.
blasphemy. Well,
Oh,
we won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, see? That's why we that's why we don't mess with
plenty
nostalgia.
of other stuff to watch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of your world building, because we're talking about the world and where we can pull some influence from,
Hmm.
you have an insane world. There's so much, and we're gonna, for those watching, we're gonna do a non-spoiler section, and then we're gonna dip into spoilers a little later on for people who have read the duology. But non-spoiler wise, can you tell us a bit about your world and the magic that goes with it, and how you blended it in with nature and so many different elements that just make it as vivid as it is?
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate that, and it's kind of interesting because when I'm reading personally, I like world building is one of the last things I generally care about.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm a big Abercrombie fan, right? And
Right.
like for he just Abercrombie built his world, and it's a very vivid world, but he did it over 9 books, right? Like he's very
True.
slow, very like subtle, and he said it himself. I think that he doesn't really care, like whatever.
Yeah.
You can imagine this part however you want. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting. I think like the feedback for the world building has been really positive for these books, which is
Yeah.
just one of the most shocking things to me. I'm like, really? Like that was never what I thought was the
But
strong point.
you absolutely did fantastic with it, so I could see it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So like the way that I kind of came around to it is I think a lot of people will build a world
Mm.
first, and they spend a lot of time doing that. Um,
Mhm.
once I because of the way I sort of concocted this story, where I basically just spent a lot of time with these characters and these specifically these moments in my head and like connecting these
Mm.
moments, right? By the time I got to writing, I was really impatient. I was like, I'm not going to spend like a month building my world or anything. Like, I'm just going to let it come naturally,
Right.
um, which I think is very unusual. Most people will build a world and then inhabit it with people. I came up with the people and then built a world around them.
Mhm.
But then essentially what I did want to accomplish with it was I wanted it to have um, the first thing was I wanted it to be very integrated with the plot. I thought that was really important. I like it when the world building and the plot are kind of interwoven together, and then you can kind of have this very natural reveal where you're learning about the world as the characters are learning about it because of all these things that are happening, and so you can do that very naturally. And then thematically, like I wasn't thinking too much of themes, but I knew that I did want to write something about environmentalism and about nature. So then the world kind of spawned out of that because I realized that the big theme of my books it is an environmental theme, right? Like the overall theme is how we exploit the environment and how that can hurt
Mhm.
us, right? And I try to approach that from different angles where we're not necessarily trying to do damage, but we don't really realize what we do, right? Like we're just trying to build
Mhm.
homes. Like the
Yeah.
people in my kingdom or in the kingdom in these books, they were just trying to build homes for their families, and in the process, they didn't realize the damage they were doing to the world.
Mhm.
And so, like the world building mostly just spawned out of that, like coming up with the plot and the themes, interweaving it together, trying to make it all very cohesive. Is where
Yeah.
it came from.
Yeah, it's fascinating how you wove it all together, and like you said, we learn about it as the characters are learning about it, and then I'm gonna do this as spoiler free as possible, but basically you just bam, you kind of get a hard truth about the world and the situation that they're actually in, and then you have an entire second book to explore all of that and the
Yeah.
atrocities that go on with it. Um, so Yeah, we'll have to dip into more of that later on in the spoiler
Mhm.
section. But for now, I would like to talk a little bit about your illustrations and the cover art because you actually have illustrations of some of the magical creatures that you had created throughout the book, in addition to the cover art. So, who was the artist for that, or both, if it was different artists? Yeah, and I'll do show and tell while you talk.
Yeah. So the cover art was done by Andrew Molesky. I think
Mhm.
he's a pretty well known artist. He just did such a brilliant job. The first time I stumbled on his art, I was like, "That's the guy. I know that's the guy that I want to go with." Um,
Yeah.
so I'm super happy with the cover art. The illustrations, the interior illustrations, kind of happened a little bit later, where I'd sent out the art copies, and like I was getting feedback from people, and one of the points of feedback is because my world has a lot of made up creatures. So
Mm.
there aren't too many like common fantasy creatures. Like we don't have dragons or whatever else like that.
Yeah.
Some people are finding it hard to visualize those creatures, and it's hard as a writer as well, where you want to make it feel natural because the character is not going to sit there thinking about how this random creature in his world exists. I think that's a very clunky way of world building. So
Mm.
I kind of talked to a few people about how other indie authors have done it, and it seems like one common way to do it is to add illustrations in books. So I gave that a shot. I found a guy named Justin on Fiverr. If anyone needs his contact info, just reach out to me on Twitter. And he did a great job. Like I basically just gave him a brief of several sketches for each of the creatures I was thinking of, and these are what he came up with. I think they turned out great.
Yeah, and I love the style because it looks like something you would draw in passing,
Yeah,
right? If you were in the world and just kind of sketching as you went along, it looks
yeah,
believable in that sense too.
yeah. And that was fully intentional. Like I wanted it to be kind of a pencil sketch.
Right.
I thought it felt a bit more authentic. I'm trying to like give these books off as like the Book of Estea. This is kind of like a
Mhm.
book, almost like a historical book, right? Even though obviously
Right.
it's not. So
Good. Yeah.
so having that feeling of like it's not like a highly processed like colored image
Mm.
inside. It's just like it just feels more cohesive with the story if it's a pencil sketch to me.
Right. Right. And when because you have the duology and what's coming out next for you? Because I know you're working on something at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm working on a companion novella. It's called A Sojourn in the Sunset Forest, and essentially well, by working on it, I'm actually basically done. I think I was finishing up edits today. Well, I'm probably going to do one more round of editing, so really happy with that. And essentially, what it is it's just an optional companion novella set 3 years before, following the same characters. And I tried to just make it like a way of thanking people who've read this book and wanted to spend a bit more time in this world and wanted to spend a bit more time with these characters. We go to a few different places that weren't explored in the main series, and it's mostly just a cozy fantasy, which was really fun to write. To be honest, when I finished these books, I was so burned out that I just didn't want to think about
Yeah.
writing for a while. So this was like a way for me to just ease back into it, and I had a lot of fun just
Yeah.
casually writing it whenever I felt like writing. So I'm really excited to get that out there.
Nice. Oh, I'm looking forward to it, especially with the cozy, because this time of year, especially as we're getting into the holiday season, it's always nice to have something cozy instead of, you can read the dark stuff, but it kind of doesn't mix well when you're going to like family events and whatnot, having moments of cheer, and then you come home and you read murder and war.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I had a question. I'm curious here. Uh, because you released this duology quite close to one another. Books one and two were released quite close. When did you start writing, and how long was this whole process in the background for you? Because for us readers, it was a matter of just a couple months, but I'm
Right.
sure that's not the case behind the scenes. So when did you start writing versus
Yeah.
getting ready to publish?
Yeah. So I released them 1 month apart, I think, if I recall.
Yeah.
So it was June and July were the two releases. So they released this year, June, July. I started writing November 2022. So it was basically
Okay.
like a full year plus 2 months. So it was about a year and 6 months, about a year and a half to get
Okay.
all the writing and the editing. Sent it out to my editor, got the feedback, and implemented it and all of that stuff. And I wrote them as one book. So
Cool.
I really do see them as one book. Like it is, that's why the series name is always um, the Book of Esther, because
Yeah.
that's kind of how I saw it. That's how I wrote it. When I started writing this story, like I was watching a lot of BookTube, and people were always saying authors need to write more standalones. We want more standalones.
Right.
You know what? I should write a standalone. That makes a lot of sense. I
Okay.
should do that. And
Yeah.
then once I started writing, because of my chaotic panting methodology or whatever, the story started sprawling. I realized like the story that I had come up with was not one very cohesive. It was small, independent, like easy to publish standalone. Um,
Right.
so then once I had it all written, I was staring at 300,000 words, thinking to myself like, this is kind of tough to debut with. Like I don't know
Mm.
if many people would trust a debut author on a 1,000-page book. So
Yeah, 'cause there's
um,
that crew on BookTube who's also like, "We need more short fantasy
exactly.
student adventures."
So then I don't know. It was always in the back of my head. But at the same time, I sent the book off to my editor, and I got a lot of feedback from her. And one of the big questions I asked her was, should I split this into two books? And she
Mm.
said that I think that you should. And at the same time, like I was starting to think that there is actually two cohesive arcs to the story. Like the
Yeah.
first book, I think has a very, it is like one character story. It's his
Yep.
struggle with mental health. He's a king, so it's his him finding his way back to the throne is essentially the first arc of the story. And in the
Mhm.
second arc, we have a lot of resolution and for a lot of the other characters, right? Like in the first
Yeah.
book, there's a lot of setup for a lot of characters, but then more progress for him. And in the second book, we have overall resolution for the plot, the world, and for him as well.
Yeah.
So once I started realizing that, I went about and did a lot of rearranging. So I tried to make the
Mm.
books as cohesive as possible within themselves, and in the end, I was really happy with it. I think it works out really well as a duology.
Yeah.
Duology, like it's not a standalone, but it's still pretty unique. Like you don't see too many duologies around, so
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
exciting. And I think like it's good to give people that opportunity to try it, right? Like they
Mm.
can read the first book. If they don't like it, they shouldn't feel too bad about dropping off, or they can just take a break. And the nice thing is that because it's split, they're not too long, right? They're
Yeah.
they're reasonable lengths, I think, for the two
And
books.
you've got the audiobooks for them as well.
Hmm.
So if people prefer that format, then that's an option too.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think you did use the audiobook for a decent amount of it, right?
Yeah, I did immersion reading for
Yeah.
mine because I love that method. For me, it just, if I do need to like continue reading for a couple chapters while I move over laundry, brilliant. I can still read and then I can just sit back down with the book.
Absolutely.
But no, it was really well performed. I think one of the things that I enjoyed about the audiobook was the emotion that went into it because it does get dark and you have these characters going through a lot.
Yeah.
The narrator did a good job about capturing that and capturing the tone,
Yeah.
which is difficult, right? You are acting, you're voice acting to try and capture that across. I think you have a total by the end of the duology, you have 6 POVs.
Yeah. I think it was 6 or 7. Uh,
Yeah,
mhm.
that's quite a few. That's quite a few arcs and characters to go through as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think Adriel did a fantastic job. He had a lot of different voices, and
Mm.
I realized like when I first started with the audiobook process, because I'd never done it before. It was very
Right.
hard for me to like let go because I had like such a strong image of what these
Oh.
characters sound like and how these scenes are meant to be
Mm.
and I had all of that. So at first I was like, I must have been the worst client that he's ever had because I was like, this character
Yeah.
has got this kind of accent and it sounds like this, and this scene, I want to emphasize this, like this is how the character should be feeling and etc. But then once I got like the first samples from him, I was like, wow. Even though it's not exactly what I was thinking, he nailed it, and he did such a great job that I was like, you know what, just go through the whole thing. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. I love that you kind of went through that journey with it. Like the, baby has to be perfect to, you know what, you did great. Just keep going.
Yeah, because I think all I would have done is made it worse.
Well, and it might have added more stress, right, to the entire process, which
Absolutely.
it sounds like you had a good experience overall
Mhm.
as a result. But I do want to say hello to John, who's here as well. And he says, to me, characters should come first. If you don't care about the characters, you won't care about what happens to the world. Absolutely. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
And Joe here says, my family events always put me in the mood for books about murder and war. Uh, so let's if you're all right with it, did you want to dip into the spoiler section now, or do you want to talk more spoiler free stuff for a little bit longer?
Um, I'm okay. Going either direction, whatever you're in the mood for. Okay, you're running the show, so.
Why don't we I'm just going to double check here. Why don't we open it up to the live chat? If they have any spoiler free questions they want to ask now is a great time. So put those in the chat. We'll open the floor to all of you. And then if nothing comes in, we'll jump right into the spoiler discussion, because I feel like this is going to be one of those chats where we can dig deep, because you put a lot of stuff in this. There's a lot of themes that you delved into. But yes, so let's Brighton here is asking if you did Gunmetal Gods.
Ooh, no. So that's Zamal Akhtar. I think he's got a very similar name to me.
Yeah.
So
Same
Zamal is,
initials.
yeah. No, Brighton. I did this one, Riven Earth.
Yeah.
I can't even say that my covers are better because he's got some great covers on those books.
He has amazing covers. Yeah. So I'll oh yeah, there Timothy's got the
Yeah.
Yeah. So while we're waiting for questions, I'll give everyone a couple more minutes, but let's dig into one more spoiler-free question, because we always got to pick our darlings. Which character was your favorite to write personally? I know you can't pick, but
Yeah. It is hard to pick. So I guess like if you're talking spoiler free, maybe I should talk about who the characters are in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically in this story we follow this guy named Kaido. So Kaido is the king of a very young kingdom. That's one of the themes of this book is, this is a kingdom where the people in this world were oppressed by these dryads, and they had a rebellion and found some freedom, and then they established their own new kingdom. And it's a very young kingdom, so a lot of their problems are like growing pains. They're trying to house their people, they're trying to deal with a lot of the conflict that comes from setting things up. So Kaido is sort of the son of the man who led that rebellion. So Isaiah was, the first king of this of these people. He's kind of like a hero in this world. And Kaido is very different from him. He's a very introverted person dealing with a lot of mental health issues, and he finds it very hard to get out of bed. Essentially, like he's basically just not able to do his job as well as he can. So we follow him. We follow Jasmine, who's his wife, and she has a lot of those struggles of trying to deal with a family member who has mental health problems, and trying to like keep things together and protect him from a lot of the work which he should be doing, and a lot of the stress that would come with that work. She's always trying to protect him from that. And then there's Raya, who is the vicereine, and she's like a childhood friend of Kaido's, and she's basically running the kingdom right now. So she's bearing a lot of burden for her friend and keeping things going. And then apart from those three, there's Mercedes, who is the master of money. So he's kind of like an antagonist, especially to the first book. We see him plotting and doing some evil things, and the story goes from there. And then we follow Otto, who is basically a retired soldier, and Yeah, Otto is terminally ill, so he's dealing with that in his life. So from those are the main characters. I think there was one more. Well, there are two more minor characters which we could
Mm.
talk about later. But of those main characters, I think Otto is probably my favorite by a small margin. I think I just really think he's such a cool guy. He's pretty funny. Like sometimes because he's at that point in his life where he just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Or sorry, I shouldn't
No, go for it.
but he just doesn't care. Like he's
Yeah.
talking to someone, he just farts because he had to fart.
Yep.
He's not going to hold it back.
He's living in pain. He's having a rough time. Yeah.
So I really like Otto, but I did mention this before to you, I think. But writing his character was really hard for me because it's just a
Mm.
very unintuitive character voice for me to put on. So there's a lot of time spent in editing, trying to make him feel realistic. Because I was really trying to. His voice is very fragmented, and that
Mm.
goes with his illness. Where when he's very sick, it becomes more fragmented because that's the way I saw it. Is when you're dealing with that much pain,
Oh,
like you're
yeah.
not thinking straight, right? Like,
Nope.
um, yeah. So that was really hard to write, but I like Otto a lot. To be honest, I like all of them. I I think I'm just gonna pick Kaido because no one else seems to like him as much as
Oh,
I
no.
do.
Oh, no.
He's
So
my sweetheart.
I'm curious then, because you're saying that not as many people enjoyed Kaido's character. Have you gotten feedback as to why that was the case? Because he is quite prominent throughout the entire duology.
Yeah. I think when you write characters with mental health, it's always kind of difficult to make them likable.
Mm.
Because when you're really in that headspace, it can be kind of heavy. It can be kind of
Yeah.
mostly frustrating, right? Like that's I think
Hmm.
the main issue is why can't this guy just get his act together and like do what he needs to do?
Yeah.
Because that's what he deals with the most. And the problem is he knows that, right? Like, and that
Yeah.
only makes him feel worse. Which to me, like that, I was trying to embody it in a as realistic a way as possible.
Hmm.
But I think that it's always going to be a bit controversial when you write a character
Yeah.
dealing with that situation.
Well, he also has the identity issue of living up to his father's status. His father has essentially become idolized as a god. Like people,
Yeah,
read his journal entries as scripture
yeah,
in certain sections. So, he's got big shoes to fill. And I'm sure that doesn't help because no matter what he would try to do, he's often compared with
yeah,
that example. So yeah, that would definitely make it worse.
yeah, yeah. And he's special to me because he's the first one that came into my head, right? Like he is
Right.
the origin of this story. Um,
Okay.
was just I was inspired by this Indian king from antiquity called Ashoka the Great, and
Okay.
I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but
No.
his story is kind of very similar to Kaido's. Well, I mean, I don't know. I changed a lot of things, but essentially, I think he conquered some people. He saw the scale of the destruction, and he felt such a degree of remorse that he spent the rest of his life trying to repent for it. So he's actually the person who spread Buddhism across the Indian Peninsula.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah. So Buddhism, as we know it today, is because
Yeah.
of him. So that's kind of what inspired me
Yeah.
for Kaido's character was just this king, who, like he's made big mistakes and he
Mm.
just finds it really hard to overcome those. Right? Like
Yeah.
how do you get back to the throne when you can't even like face your council? Right? Like
No.
how do you go face your council after the mistakes you've made? Like, oh my God,
Hmm.
they're gonna be talking about me. They're gonna be whispering behind my back. What are they saying about me right now? And he just
Yeah.
crumbles. He crumbles under that pressure. So I always felt for the guy. you know? And
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, with that being the case, why don't we jump into our spoiler chats and we'll kind of keep the conversation going from there. So, for everyone watching, whether it is live now or in a future with the replay, just know you've got about 5 seconds to hop off. And we'll
thanks so much for joining the chat, guys.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us in the spoiler-free chat. And I mean, if you want to stick around for spoilers, by all means, there's some cool stuff to talk about here. Better yet, if you want to hop off now, go read the books and then come back. There you go.
I encourage this.
Yes. So let's talk more about Kaido's character then, because like you said, he goes through a lot. He has big shoes to fill. He's got, mental health that he goes through, but then he also has to go through making those choices, those really hard choices. And I'll let you dig deeper into those if you want. But then he has to suffer the consequences of it because he also has Raya at his side who is extremely loyal and
Yeah.
will follow his, even if he's not there, she will do whatever it takes to make sure what he wishes is done.
Mm,
And that's something he also has to live with too, because it's not just him acting, it's other people acting out his will.
yeah.
So in terms of those, that kind of relationship and those events, what was uh what was it like for you trying to capture that for both of them? Because they're polar opposites in ways,
Yeah.
between Raya and Kaido.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I think about the story, I feel like the relationship between the three characters, Jasmine,
Mm.
Raya, and Kaido, like that's really the heart of the story.
Yeah.
Is these three characters, how they've grown up together, how they depend on each other, and like the history and the conflicts that come with that,
Mm.
right? Like Raya and Jasmine, there's a whole thing between
Yeah.
them, right? Like
Yes.
they used to be best friends, but things are icy now.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that because Raya pushes Kaido more than Jasmine wants her to.
Yeah.
And Raya, like they both love Kaido with like deeply. And
Mm.
one of the reasons is because Jasmine described Kaido as compassion's very heartbeat, where
Mm.
he's a very caring person, right?
Yeah.
Like even though he can't he's not necessarily competent. Um,
Mm.
she like they both understand that he's got a big heart, and I imagine that over the course of a lifetime, like when you have friends like that, those are the ones that you really care for, who have shown you that love and respect over the course of a lifetime. So
Yeah.
they both love him dearly, but they have very different approaches on how to deal with his mental health problems, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where like I've seen this in my own family where like if I have a family member who's dealing with some issues, like different people have different ideas on how to help them out of it. And Raya thinks that
Yeah.
Kaido should be pushed. Like she thinks if he just goes to one council meeting, you'll see it's not that bad. Like like he's getting
Yeah.
into his own head. Like he needs to just get out of this room. He needs to go and do a little bit of work. And
Mhm.
Jasmine watched him almost commit suicide. So for her,
Yeah.
as his wife, that's not something which she can abide, right? Like that's really hard for her to
Yeah.
deal with. And she's like taking on all the burdens of just trying to protect him from
Mhm.
from all
And and the paranoia of it as well, right? To protect him at all costs, right? The fear of will he try again?
yeah. And then for her, it's always like the same paranoia of what if the next thing I say to him is the thing that pushes him over the
Yeah.
edge, right? Like I can't, even though he does things which hurt her, even though he
Mhm.
does things which, like cause her worry and stress, like he just runs
Mhm.
off on a random quest with his friend and leaves her nothing
Yeah.
but a note, even though she's like worried out of her mind. She,
Yeah.
it's like, how do I tell him off? Because if I say something bad to him, like, is that going to push him over the edge?
Yeah.
So to me, like trying to capture those feelings and interactions was always key.
Mm.
And then it also just with Raya and Kaido specifically. Sorry, what exactly was your question? I was like,
So, Kaido, because he's,
yeah,
he has a hard time making choices, but when he finally does make choices, Raya is extraordinarily loyal.
yeah,
And she pushes and follows through with those choices even when he realizes they shouldn't or
right,
they misunderstood something, but then he has to live with the consequences of what Raya had done as a result of what he requested, right?
yeah,
So, already struggling with mental health and then having this super loyal person by your side who enacts your will without a flaw,
yeah. And
is
she's very hyper competent, right? Like there is meant to
Mhm.
be an intentional, um, what's the right word, contrast between the two of them,
Yes.
where like she's very much the opposite. Like she's a lot more like his father than he is, right? Like she's
Yeah.
very she's very stoic. She's very icy, very hard. Like she focuses in and like she doesn't overthink things. She just goes and gets it done. And Kaido obviously isn't like that. And one of the problems is her competence feeds his insecurity, right? Like he's always thinking, why did I have to break down in front of her? Like if it could have been anyone except her, that would have been okay.
Or she would do better at this. She's doing at this.
Exactly.
Why do I need to even be here? You know?
Exactly. Yeah. So then it's one of the pieces of subtext I wanted to put in there. I didn't want to like say it outright because I thought it was a bit better as subtext, was his feelings of like, why don't I abdicate? Because then she'll become queen, and won't that be better for everyone?
Yeah.
But then he knows that she doesn't want it, right? Because she's never wanted it. So then he can't really, he feels bad enough that he's put this much burden on her.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to put any more.
Yes.
Right? But he also can't lighten the load.
Yeah. Yeah, because she's an excellent soldier. And then everything just builds and builds, and she gets more and more responsibility and has to weasel out who I'm going to segue into next, traitors and whatnot. You know, she ends up with a lot on her shoulders, and that pressure cracks over time too. So let's segue a little bit into that traitor who's lost his hand as a result. My Sadies.
I love how I think I told you this. There are at least 3 people who finished the book and then told me I still hate my Sadies though.
Yes. I'll raise my hand because that was me. That was a fascinating arc though, because you made this sleazy, grimy, like master of money who's trying to overthrow the throne and gain more power, and he's rich and he's, you know, plotty, and he gets taken down to the very, not a peg, the very bottom of whatever level they're at. He's in the basement. You know, he gets taken down quite a peg, and you're kind of like, all right, well, you know, he goes through all this stuff and he's kind of a little bit better, man. I'm feeling for him now. All right, he's starting to become a better person. No, right there, he messed up again. So he was the type of character where you did it so beautifully, because I hated him. I loved hating him, and then I was like, oh no, I feel for him. Why do I feel oh no, I hate him again. Yeah, I love to hate him. Took me on a whirlwind. You gave me a slice of hope with him. And then took it away.
That's the Joe Abercrombie influence, right? Like
So go for it.
Oh no, I don't know. I like my Sadies. I enjoyed writing him because I think he's pretty funny in his own head. Like he gets like so petty and like starts getting angry at people for like the smallest things. And like,
and for his own, and for his own insecurities. Yeah, like a lot of his insecurities is like, oh, it's their fault that I'm in this position. Like, oh no, if you didn't try and off someone, then you'd be fine. You know?
Yeah, and then, you know, like he's one of those people who really justifies his motivations, right? Like, I'm just doing what's best for the kingdom. Like, they don't understand that this is how it should be, and stuff like that. But I think like for characters who are fully pure antagonists, they're often quite competent. So I wanted to make him not 100% competent. Like, he's kind of dumb, and he makes like big mistakes.
He's good with money.
Yeah, he's good with money, but he's also very possessive of money. You know, like he's just suffering in his like crappy, broken down tent, and he's like, and he's so petty that the guy he bought the tent from, he makes sure that guy is out of business, but then he doesn't go and buy a new one because he's like, it just, you know, it's not worth the chips. So, I think that the thing with Mercedes was he kind of came to me as a character who would go on some sort of redemption story. But then I wasn't 100% sure how that redemption story would end. And so the way it ended up going, I just felt like how he acted towards the end with Jasmine, that just felt more true to his character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason I say yeah in that way is because, it's spoilers, so we'll just dig into all of it. So when he's plotting this coup to, he's been ran out of town, he's in hiding, he's on the outskirts of the world with these zealots, and he gets together a crew to essentially work in the background while he's trying to gain supporters. But while he is doing that, he ends up living in poverty essentially because he's playing a role and he's playing a follower of this zealotry religion that people that are, following Isaiah. But he lives the full role. Like he could be off with his cohorts living in luxury as they are. Because I think at one point, it starts with a T, his cohort, uh,
Tior.
TR. He actually commented at one point saying he was fatter than the last time he saw him. So he's living in upright luxury while Mercedes is just in a crummy tent in the middle of nowhere, suffering burns and putting himself into dangerous situations. But he ends up developing a very endearing relationship with a young girl who is essentially outcasted
Mm,
by, where he's from in the world
yeah.
and is orphaned and looked down upon. So that's kind of where you got the redemption for me is, oh, he's looking out for this little girl, questionable at times because he endangered her initially. But he comes to actually care for her over time, and he actually cares about I would say he mainly cares about her. I want to say he would care about the other kids, but really I think it's just this little girl that he cares about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think so like I think there's a few things to unpack where first is like his commitment to the cause. Like
Yeah.
he's a politician, you know. He understands that with these followers, he gets into their camp, he starts seeing that like okay, not everyone in here is practicing what they preach, right?
Yes.
So as a politician, he can kind of manipulate that. He can be like, look, I'm the guy who is dressed in rags, unlike those guys who are pretending
Yeah.
to be devout and leaders, like they're eating well,
Mhm.
they've got servants and stuff. No, no, no. I'm following Isaiah. I am a true follower,
Yeah.
right? And that's like part of how he gains support. So a bit into the act, but then also obviously very manipulative. Everything you
Yeah.
do with is untouched, right? He's just trying to get in with their good graces because he
Yeah.
realizes if I can use these people, I can manipulate them. I can get the other followers to follow
Mhm.
them, and they can be great tools for me.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, like he gets shown love from Sonia and Isha, right? Like those two,
Yeah.
I think the affection that they show him kind of changes him,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
the way they treat him, the way that other followers start treating him,
Mhm.
Amat and Elwin specifically,
Yeah.
where they don't sell him out when the enforcers come to the camp and they wreck everything, and he's just like, how stupid are these guys? Why didn't they sell me
Yeah.
out? Right?
Yeah.
Like I would have done it in a second, and,
Yes.
and that's what he's and that's what he's thinking. But in his actions, it's like I tried to show that it does leave an impact. I think
Mhm.
when people are kind to you, it changes you, or it opens, like kindness breeds kindness, as it were. So
Yeah.
if other people show you love, then I think that can change who you are. So I
Mhm.
wanted to have him go on that journey where
Mhm.
essentially he starts finding other things to live for, and then once they go across the desert to Mpaka, he sort of
Mhm.
asks himself like, this is my city, like what do I need Heartsong for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I wanted there to be a lot of inner conflict where he's just trying to
Yeah.
decide, but then that inner demon just never quite goes away, like his
No.
his stump starts itching and he's like, god
Yeah.
damn it, it's that Raya. She do this to me.
Yeah, it was gone in a split second of an act,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah, because later on, he tries to save Jaswin, and that's where she confronts him essentially, and he just reverts back to his terrible self without a second thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
so
he was very conflicted until then. I
mm,
think the way I saw it was right up to um, what happens with him and Azelle is
mhm,
he was more leaning in that evil direction, but I think after that, like it really
yeah,
changed him and shocked him. And then when he saw like what he had done with killing the Santaj children or having that order sent
Yeah.
to have them killed. And when he saw, what those children, like, they just reminded him of Isha, right? Like, he hadn't realized, I think, what that order meant when he
Yeah.
came up with it. But then when he saw the effects of it, I think it had a profound impact on him. And from there, everything was just regret and like, oh shit, what have I done? And now, like, what can I do to make this right? Where then he's trying to administer a broken city, right? Like, the city's
Yeah.
completely falling apart. No one's listening to him. And he's just
Mhm.
trying to keep things together and it's chaos. And that's when he goes to Jasmine for help.
Yes.
Bit of miscommunication there,
Yes, yeah, well, I mean, he did try and kill her husband, so it's uh, yeah, it's a hard toss-up there.
Yeah.
So yeah, he absolutely deserved the title of, kinda hated him, kinda liked him, still hated him in the end.
I did. I'm very happy that he leaves people conflicted. I think
Yeah,
that's appropriate. You know.
I would say so, yeah. So, let's, because there was one character that you really enjoyed, writing that was Otto. Otto goes on a brutal journey as well with terminal illness and the whole situation with his wife. And I mean, he's lived a hard life as it was. He was a warrior, if you will, and a soldier, and didn't exactly have it easy to begin with, being a part of the original uprising. So, what was it like for you to try and? I know you said it was a little bit more difficult in terms of getting his voice,
Mhm.
and his dialogue. But what was your, I guess what I want to ask is what was a defining moment for you in writing his character?
Defining moment. Yeah. So yeah, Otto is interesting because he was also like from the very conception of the story, he was in my head. And
Mm,
a specific scene that I had of Otto in my head was him traversing the desert. So I was imagining like this really old man, like just walking through a desert and like getting blasted by sandstorms and just having a really rough go of it.
yeah.
And then that's where that story started. Was like, why is he there? What's he trying to do? Like, where is he going?
Yeah.
What's the story here? And that it's sort of evolved from that. And then I don't know why my sadistic mind just wanted to torture him as much as possible. I'm like, oh, I may as well make him terminally ill. I may as well.
Just
I may as well.
icing on the cake.
I know. I may as well in the first scene like kill off the love of his life. No big deal.
In a very brutal way,
I
too.
know. I know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Otto, to me, Otto's story is the heart of the overall story. I think
Mm,
it's definitely the one where when I was writing it, I was the most emotional about his story and some of
right.
the moments that happened there. It's just a story of fatherhood, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I think you asked about my turning point with writing him. I don't know. I don't know if there was a turning point per se, but it was just like when he first goes into the village and then he's woken up at night and he sees Soot, who was like the little sun touched boy, the first one that he
Oh,
met.
yes. Yes. Yeah.
And then he goes out and sees like Soot's like stolen his baby.
Yes. Yes.
um, I think
Mischievous
that's
little boy.
yeah. That's the scene where writing that scene kind of helped me understand him a little bit better. Where
Mm,
he's not like a brutal general. He's not like other people in the way they treat the sun-touched kids. Like people literally beat these
mhm.
kids, right? Like they
Yeah.
they are so paranoid about their magic that there's like
Yeah.
no limit. And Otto just gives it a lecture. Like Soot actually attacked him. Like he was
Yeah.
going for the kill. Like he could have killed him,
Yeah.
right? But Otto like brings out his sword, he deflects the blade, and he's like, "What are you doing, you idiot? Don't ever do that. They're gonna take your head off."
Yeah.
Right?
He protects them in
Yeah,
a way. Yeah.
yeah. So like he doesn't go for violence off the bat, right? And
Mhm.
like he has that empathy, even though he's in this state where he just can't love his baby, right?
Yeah.
Like his baby has that same magic, and because of what happened with his wife, like it's very hard
Mhm.
for him to come to terms with that. But I think
Yeah.
writing that specific scene helped me realize like kind of where his arc has to go and how we get there is he is a compassionate person
Yeah.
and he understands these children and the outcasts of their society better than most people do, and that's
Mhm.
why that's like one of his paths to the coming back around to loving his own child, and
Yeah.
understanding like the life that she's going to lead.
And he's got a timeline on him because he's, he doesn't have much time left. So, there's a bit of a race against the clock as in terms of a reader, where I was like, come on, just please get to the, please, it's your baby, please, and grapple with that a little bit faster.
I'm curious, like, I suppose
Mhm.
you did want him to reconnect with his child. Like that was the motivation for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like as a parent, going through that journey with him, I was like, I completely understood where he was coming from, right? Losing his wife in childbirth, devastating. On top of it, baby comes out with magical powers that inadvertently killed his wife. So all the blame is on the baby in terms of his eyes and disownment. But at the same time, as the heart of the parent, I'm like, you still have to love your baby. It's like that inherent feeling. So I was pretty much I for myself reading through, I was like, he will get there at some point. He will get there, and if he doesn't, I will be very sad for him because he will be missing out. And so yeah, for me reading him, I did have that hope off the bat that he would reconnect, but it was heartbreaking for
Mhm.
him to completely, he didn't even refer to her as a her for the longest time, or by a name, right? He
Yeah.
just kind of referred to it as it, and he
It,
let the children take care of her. Like he wouldn't even change her diaper, and it was just very heartbreaking
yeah.
for reading that perspective, because I can't imagine being that lost in terms
Yeah.
of being a parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was one of those more subtle things. Like I'm glad you
Mhm.
caught on that, but
Yeah.
over the course of the first book, like towards the end, does start calling it, instead of saying
Yes.
it, he starts calling it the baby, or
Yes.
or still doesn't use her name, right? Like he's not
No.
quite there yet.
No.
But he starts like you start seeing the human part of it, right? Like
Mhm.
he starts humanizing her, and
Yes.
when he looks at her towards the end, I think there's a line where it's just there's no anger anymore because anger is too hard to hold on to. It's just
Yeah.
pain, like it's just grief now,
Yeah.
because all she is a reminder of Tilly,
Yeah.
and like that's just part of it. I don't know. I feel like Otto's story might have come from like a deep seated paranoia of my own. Like, I have a
Right.
wife I love very much, and we don't have kids just yet, but
Right.
as a guy, like that's always something in the back of your head. Like, what do I do in that situation? And like, I don't know how I would deal with it. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe Otto's story was a way of processing that for me. But
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, because it's always a fear, right? Like even when we were planning, it was always a possibility, right?
yeah,
But you always hope that's not going to happen to you, right? And so reading his story, um, it it was heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time when he does finally come to that realization. But at that point too, I think it's around the same point where he starts to humanize his daughter,
mhm,
that his mission is done. He's been on this long trek and journey to deliver his baby to other sun-touched people who will take care of her. He's dying. He's like, you know what? I got to pass this kid off to someone who can handle her. He does that, and he's like, all right, we're done. I'm sad. I regret, grief, whatever it is. Job's done. And his entire demeanor changes as soon as he hands off that baby.
yeah,
Yeah, and from there, just it's a. I want to say it's a whirlwind, but it's a very slow whirlwind.
yeah. Yeah, I think that he hands off the baby at the end of book one.
Mhm.
So I know that there were a few readers who messaged me to say like I mean, some readers like
Mhm.
loved Otto, and so they were asking like, is he gonna be in the next book? Because like he's kind of done. He's given the baby away. Like, what's even gonna happen? Um,
Mhm.
and there were other readers who thought he shouldn't be in the next book. They're like, okay, like like that should be it.
Accent.
For Otto, like just accident, he should be dead.
Yeah.
um,
Harsh.
or whatever. But to me, I thought there's still a story there, because
Mm.
now it's about his inner conflict of finding that purpose in life. Like, I
Mhm.
have a month to live, right? Like,
Yeah.
do I go back home to the ashes of my wife? Like that was his
Yeah.
mission from the start, right? I'm gonna go drop off this baby and then I'm just gonna go home and die with her. Like that's all
Yeah.
he wanted. That's all he wanted
Yeah.
was to be buried with her.
Yeah.
But then he hears the baby crying, right? Like he just can't get that out of his head.
Yeah.
And he starts asking himself, like, what would Tilly have wanted?
Yeah.
And I think that was it's maybe one of my favorite scenes in across both books is the one where he has that revelation of like I misunderstood what she wanted and I
Yeah.
have to go back to my baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think he has a little help from Jilly, who is, for lack of a remembering the actual term, a horse.
Loma.
Lower. There you
Yeah.
go. But he's kind of got an animal companion in a way,
Yeah.
as well, that kind of assists him in that. She kind of nudges him to go
Not
back.
just
If I'm, yeah,
yeah. Animals know
um,
sometimes, you know.
they do. She was a very knowledgeable, intuitive animal. So I want to talk. Is there any other character you wanted to delve into before we dig into another area here?
Um, Not in particular. I'm curious, like, who your favorite was. You know, any favorite moments you had. I know we chatted a little bit on Instagram
Yeah.
about this, but you know, for the crowd.
Yes, for the crowd. I liked quite a few of the characters for different reasons. I think the most memorable for me would be Otto and Jaswin,
Mm,
in terms of Otto with the parenthood journey and everything he goes through to try and do right by his daughter, especially towards the second book and the ending and everything he does for her. Jasmine was fascinating because I didn't quite care much for Jasmine in the beginning. In book one, I was like, okay, well, she's a character. We need to know her POV. She's going through some stuff, but it wasn't very apparent what she was going through.
mhm,
Book two is when it absolutely sold me on her character because we get to see her at her absolute worst. And her version of absolute worst is just identity crisis and not living up to what she feels a queen should be, suffering the way she did. But
yeah,
essentially, she's an icon for her kingdom. People love her. They see
mhm,
her and they weep. and and she attributes that with beauty
yeah,
and poise, and it's later on where she realizes that beauty had very little to do with it. It had to do with how she treated her people, how she held herself,
mhm,
and suffering disfigurement and going through that acceptance of disfigurement, despite, because there's an entire scene, I think it's in book one, where she's panicking over having a breakout and
right,
trying to cover it up with makeup. And you're like, okay, well, I get that, but I don't think I understood how extreme it was in book one. And then book two, you really delve into it. And I think that was the most satisfying arc for me,
mhm,
was her going through all of that, because half her face gets burned. She's not going to be quite the beauty that she had always tried to be, because she tried very hard with her appearances.
yeah,
And then having to shift from external to internal, in terms of value, was a very satisfying arc.
mhm. Yeah. I like Jasmine a lot.
Mhm.
And you know, like that final the impetus for her. It's like I was saying
Mhm.
earlier, where the relationship between her, Kaido, and Raya is kind of the heart of the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
Um, so in book one, when Kaido hits rock bottom, right, like with
Mhm.
everything that happened with Willow and all that
Mhm.
stuff, you know, like he's just so depressed he can't get out. Like the thing that moves him to take on the throne is when Raya breaks down, right?
Yeah.
Because he's always dependent on her. So seeing her, seeing how she's crumbled under the pressure,
Yeah.
it's like the impetus for him to realize like I need to step up because
Yeah.
I've done this to her, right? And like this
Yeah.
is like the thing that pushes him over the edge. And it was the same thing for Jasmine, where I wanted to
Mhm.
tie it together with her relationships, where the reason she leaves that orphanage is she realizes Raya's gone. And if Raya's gone, then there's no one to bring the kingdom together. Like,
Mhm.
because her and Kaido had always depended on her so much. Raya so much. That is.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of Raya, she goes through a lot. I would say, looking back on it, it was a lot of um she just lost herself in her work. She was just ended up being a workaholic. And even in terms of when her father becomes sick and then, she loses him, she doesn't react very emotionally until she breaks down at his pyre.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of where we see her crack. But even then, after the fact, she goes right back into work. She was just a straight workaholic, completely dedicated and loyal.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to see that process with her,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. The
because
thing that
she doesn't falter. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, no. You're right. The thing with Raya is the way I saw her is she's a very focused individual
Mm,
who has found it very hard to find meaning in her own life.
right.
Like she never wanted power. She doesn't want to be a vice reign, right? But she also doesn't know what she wants to do with life. Like her father told her, when are you going to stop wanting the kingdom for that boy and like do something that you want to do?
Hmm.
And she thought to herself, like, how could I tell him that I don't know what that is? Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what I want to do with my life, right?
Yeah.
So she has this codependency on Kaido and Jasmine where she just doesn't, like, those two are married now, but she's still in love with
Mhm.
Jasmine. Like, she can't move on from that. Um,
Yeah.
and so she finds it very hard to find her own purpose in life. And that's why when she sort of realizes, like, okay, this is what we need to do for the
Hmm.
kingdom, like this is, like you said, a workaholic, like this is what my
Yeah.
job is, then she just zeroes in and
Hmm.
focuses in on that, and that can lead her down a very dark path. um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so she sort of had a bit of a descent into madness, and that's fueled also by what happened to her father,
Hmm.
and the potential of Jasmine catching the plague and
Hmm.
dying, I think, is what really drove what she did to the Nightlings.
Yeah. Yeah, because like that was kind of what I was referring to earlier, where when Kaido says, let's move forward with this. And she kind of just takes the rein and she goes for it right to the very end. And then he kind of has to, live with the consequences of those actions as well.
Yeah,
That was it, was essentially the genocide of those nightlings.
yeah,
Um, so it's, yeah, okay, let's shift a little bit here if that's okay.
sure.
Because you wrote a lot of heavy topics throughout this book. There's mental health, terminal illness, identity. We've got the genocide, and essentially the world is coming to an end with natural influences. So, out of writing all of this, what was I guess I have multiple questions on that, but what was the hardest part for you to write? In terms of whether it was emotionally impactful, was it difficult to capture what was in your mind? Whatever comes to your mind first, but what was difficult to write across those darker themes?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of particular scenes were pretty difficult to
Mhm.
write. Um, like the one where between Mercedes and Isel, that one I
Yeah.
think it was very hard to write, and it caused me a lot of anxiety about whether it's okay to have that in the book in the first place and how people are going to
Right.
react to it and stuff like that. Everything to do with mental health. So
Mm.
in that sense, a lot of Kaido's chapters were challenging, where I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to try and do it justice. And it's one of those things where like you just don't know, right? Like you can try your best.
Yeah.
Some people, like for some people, that's just not how their lived experience, right? Like for
Hmm.
other people, it might more closely match their lived experience. Like everyone has a different experience with mental health. So
Yeah.
trying to just keep that authentic and trying to keep that real, I thought
Yeah.
was tough. And then yeah, like everything to do with the genocide, um, there was also a major source of inner conflict where I hope this is okay.
Yeah.
Like I wanted the characters to be faced with them and like impossible choices and see how different characters
Mm.
react to that
Yeah.
based on their experiences, right? Like
Yeah.
Kaido and Raya have extremely different reactions to the genocide,
Hmm.
how they go about it. where one
Yeah.
of them just doesn't care. Like, and
Yeah.
it's set up from the prologue, where Azula gets captured by Raya and Kaido, and she sees Raya's eyes, and Azula thinks to herself, like, this woman will kill me and murder Willow, and she won't
Yeah.
even blink, because
No.
Raya is that kind of person. Like, she is utterly dedicated to two or three people in her life, and she
Mhm.
is brutal to
Yeah.
anyone else.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, she's essentially just a perfect warhound, if you think
yeah,
of it in that way. Yeah, she's just fully dedicated and yeah, just cold killer when it comes
you
down to it.
you want her on your side, essentially.
Yes. If you're not Kaido or Jasmine, well, good luck.
um, so yeah, like the genocide. I mean, it's just sad. But when I
Mm,
when I thought about, like, if like, if people had that impossible choice in real life, I think they would take it without a doubt. Like,
yeah.
if it was a matter of saving your family, or
Mhm.
like, if you have to go out and kill an entire race of some creature which
Yeah.
you're not really that connected to, like, other than Kaido, most humans were not really connected to the Nightlings, right?
Yeah.
Like, they would do it. But at the same time, I wanted to see, sort of explore that idea of, what if the Nightlings didn't fight back? Like, what if this isn't conflict? Like, that just makes it more
Mm.
tragic, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just they made murderers out of warriors,
Yeah.
and so the soldiers have to deal with that. And that's one of the
Mhm.
things which we see through Varion's perspective, and
Yeah.
the way that all of them just feel a little bit deflated when they're out
Mhm.
there. Like, they just, like, it's not a good feeling. Like, they don't feel like heroes bringing a
No.
home, right?
No.
So
No, and they were, it wasn't just the older ones, they were taking cubs, all of them. There was no discernment. It was just how many, cures, how many medicines will this give us? It was
yeah,
a numbers game.
yeah,
And
and I think,
yeah.
like, that's how people would deal with it, right? Like,
Mm.
you otherize, make you other the other person, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
you just don't think of them as a real living thing. They just
Yeah.
become a number, like an object, and that's, I think, the only way that human beings can deal with that kind of slaughter.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it was like a shield in a way for at least for Raya, because she stopped viewing them absolutely like that. I know the soldiers and the other POV, they didn't feel right about it the entire time, but Raya was like, okay, well, that's two more. Okay, that's three more. All right, I think we've got like, she was literally counting off in her head,
Yeah.
and completely detached. In terms of the magic system, because that was fascinating as well. We were talking earlier about that, but you have essentially a focus on two main portions of the magic system, although there was a third, and I have so many questions about that, but we probably won't have time because we're getting close to an hour and a half here. I don't want to keep you too much longer. But in terms of the plant and sun magic,
Hmm.
as you were developing that, I imagine you were, as you talked about the process earlier in your writing, but and how you developed it, I imagine it came out of the experiences from the characters and that conflict of what would happen to the world if humans kept just breaking it down. But you went into such incredible detail with it that we get history, we get lore, we get we going back however many hundreds of years, and then it did get quite specific in areas as well. So,
Hmm.
uh, there had to be some form of keeping track of it, first of all, but also development to it. Because I know you said that your focus was the characters, but there's a lot there with those just two facets of the magic system, not even including the third, which is a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
yeah, how did that come to be? How did you figure all that out, and how did you keep track of it?
Yeah. So, I wanted the magic system to not feel like a big focus of the story, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like,
Yeah.
just as an example, like, if you read Mistborn, then
Yep.
obviously the magic system is so critical, like, it's key.
Yeah.
Like, the fun of Mistborn is, like, oh, how are they going to solve this problem using the
Yeah.
magic system? So I like a softer magic system approach, but I wanted to make it feel, to try and make it more authentic. I made it like hard in my head, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
but like sell it as soft in the sense that the characters don't actually understand the magic at all.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was a start. The way it came about, um, to be honest, it was a little bit winged from the start.
I love it.
I am honestly more of a pantser than I want to
Yeah.
be. But
Okay.
yeah, like I was writing the prologue. Like that's where a lot of the magic system came about. Is just from writing the
Right.
prologue, getting in the heads of these dryads, and like understanding. Okay, there's a sort of connectivity here
Mm.
um, between all of these different dryads, and then Niall just showed up to the prologue, and all of a sudden it's like, okay,
Yeah.
what is the source of this magic? And it really, to me, it was like the celestial entities, because for
Mm.
a long time, like those were the gods for a lot of people. It was the sun, the earth, the moon, like the
Yeah.
big things in the sky, and the
Yeah.
thing that feeds you.
Yeah.
um, and so there was some inspiration from sort of that uh, history
Mhm.
of gods. And yeah, like it just kind of, I wanted to make sure it was very integrated with the plot,
Mm.
where yeah, everything just tied in together. So it made sense to have, okay, there's like the sun magic is like its own thing, which is all related to the sun god, and then the
Mhm.
earth magic is its own thing related to the earth goddess, and the moon magic is like its own thing. And
Mhm.
different people have different acts. Like not everyone can access every magic, obviously, right? Like
Yeah.
humans are born of the earth and the
Mhm.
sun. And so a few humans are born more of the sun than of the earth,
Yeah.
and those are the sun touched, obviously.
Right.
But then every human has some connection to the earth, because obviously, like, we are birthed from the earth.
Mhm.
And so that was really just, I think a lot of the magic system came about is from tied into the thematic elements of environmentalism and stuff like that, where I wanted, by for instance, by personifying the earth, right? Like towards the very end, there's these, I guess, more ethereal moments where you kind of realize, like, oh, like the god actually is real, right? Like
Mhm.
there actually is an Astea, right? And she is like, she is the essence of the earth, but she's also a conscious entity,
Yeah.
which keeps everything together. But by making her a conscious entity, I can put that um, sort of writing spin on it, where she has that ability to forgive you. So like
Mhm.
for all that we've done to the earth doesn't care. It's just going to keep on spinning, right?
Yeah.
But like we can make things right. So that
Yeah.
was like my hopeful message. There
Yeah.
was like the earth can forgive us, even though obviously it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, the earth will keep moving, but,
Yeah.
whether or not we, redeem ourselves is a whole other issue.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's why the earth magic was all tied into that
Mm.
element of forgiveness, right? Like the first
Mm.
test is to forgive your enemies. The second test is to forgive yourself.
Mhm.
Um, and so when when ultimately we come around to resolving the problem, like Kaido asks Astea to forgive them, right? And it's like that was her whole essence, is she is like that, she embodies that element of forgiveness, and
Mhm.
of course she does, right? Because that is who she is. And so for me, that was like one of the key thematic moments where, like if we change, the earth will accommodate us. Like we can live in unity with the earth if we,
Yeah.
had the willpower to do so. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I am curious, and this is just a fun hypothetical question. If you were to write yourself as a character in the world, which one would you end up being? Which kind of facet of the magic system would you end up falling under, do you think?
I think I would be a very useless guy from somewhere in the West, because I'm like, I would not be a protagonist in this story. I'd just be
No,
some
no.
random farmer.
Fair as a plant. Let's say plant. Go with
Yeah.
plant.
um, I mean, yeah, I think I would probably connect the most with the Earth stuff. Like,
Hmm.
to me, I think it's just the idea of this great web of life where there is a connection across
Yeah.
all ecosystems, which is I mean, obviously, this is like taken to the next level in fantasy and stuff, but
Mm.
in reality, like all of the Earth's ecosystems are connected to some degree, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of environmental interactions across the world, which was the inspiration for that sort of web of life thing. Like
Hmm.
to me, that would be maybe the coolest thing, you know, like to
Yeah.
just be one with the grass. Like I'm a
Yeah.
hippie, you know.
Name each individual blade of grass, greet them every morning. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love it. Yeah, because it is a fascinating concept, even in our own world, right? Everything supports each other. Without one thing, we lose a big part of what we need to sustain life. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a fascinating concept. Now,
One of
yeah.
the funny things about my story, one of my cousins told me after he read it.
Mm.
So he said essentially the entire thing was they just needed marriage counseling. So he was talking specifically about the gods, right? Like
Yeah.
Asteria and Mithras, like
Yeah.
the earth and the sun. Like they just needed
Yeah.
some marriage counseling, man. Like tell them to make up with each other. Like come on. Like,
How do you navigate marriage counseling between gods, you know?
exactly. Yeah.
Especially when you don't know the gods are there, because
Mhm.
that's a big thing at the beginning. They have no clue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, fundamentally, this world is so flawed because your
Mhm.
connection to the god is through one individual, like the link. That's so
Yeah.
stupid. That's
Yeah.
just the worst idea. Like,
Oh, yeah, and it's one link per god as
yeah,
well. So talk about miscommunication in such a big world, right? How often are they gonna talk to one another?
I know. And then what
Yeah.
happens when the link dies? Like, it's a bit iffy.
Yeah.
If there's if there's a baby,
Yeah.
then it'll be okay. But I mean, I don't know. What if you're killing all the babies because you're dryads and you're evil and you don't want to make that link again?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. More stories.
Yeah,
That's
more
what I'm
stories.
hoping for. I am curious, is there a part of your world of, a character that you touched on but didn't delve into? Anything like that that you would love to dig more into and tell a story about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all of the stuff in the desert, like the
Mm.
Empaka and the desert city, and all of the history that I sort of alluded to there. I think
Mhm.
it could be potentially some interesting stories that happened in a different timeline from this one,
Yeah.
where mayhaps there wasn't this the world was still turning at that time, and
Mm.
people had that connection to both gods, and there was conflict between humans with sun powers and dryads who lived in the forest. Like there could be some interesting stories there
Yeah.
potentially. um
Absolutely.
yeah.
History to me is fun in those worlds where you get
Yeah.
the kind of like, well, let's go back to the Mistborn trilogy, where you get, the little touches on modern day they have to learn, but then there's a whole slew of history that they have no clue, and then slowly they uncover it.
Yeah.
To me, that process is fascinating because especially when I'm so invested in the world because of the characters and everything they went through, getting to find out the history of where it all comes from the author too is just leaves more questions, really, at the end of the day. It's
Yeah, I mean,
satisfying, but you have more questions as a result.
yeah, like I think it adds a lot of depth to the world if you can
Mhm.
imply that there is a lot of history. Now,
Yeah.
to be fair, I'd have to make a whole bunch of it up now, but let's not talk about
That's alright.
that.
You're the author, you have that power.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you can do it if and when you choose to.
I'm curious what your favorite
Mm.
scene was across the two books. A single was there? Did I ask
Oh,
you this already? I don't think so.
um, you might have. There are a lot of memorable scenes, um, that I walked away with. I think, well, I can't say it's my favorite. The most devastating scene was Niall's end.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Um, yeah, because it ends off in a brutal way.
Yeah.
Um,
The poor guy.
and that one stuck with me because I loved his character too. He was so endearing. But in terms of favorite, it might be as simple as moments with Mercedes and the little girl. I can never remember her name, but the
Isha.
one Isha,
Yeah.
where she's trying to reach out to him and she's playing a game with him and he's like, "Oh, fine, freaking play a game with me. He doesn't want to be anywhere near her. But she runs off into the desert, forgetting that he can't do that.
Mhm.
And he gets burned as a result, and she feels terrible. But just that innocence of curiosity that she had with him and fascination,
Yeah.
but adoration as well. She just wanted to play and
Yeah.
spend time with him. And then you have this, plotting, selfish man who's just like, ah, fine, pawn on a board, whatever. The entire dynamic of it was probably one of my favorites in that regard. And it's such a small moment in the grand
Mhm.
scheme of the entire duology, but that one stuck with me, I think, because it's both sad and joyful at the same time.
Yeah. I really love that you picked that one. And I
Mm.
like Isha because she's a little bit bratty. Like
Yes.
when Zanya tells Mercedes to go away, she just starts screaming and screaming and won't stop screaming.
And then when she's like, "Stay away from that man," she's like, "Oh, let's go play tag.
Yeah.
Let's have fun. Oh, look who I brought home."
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's yeah, I think I loved it for that reason. Is she means well. She absolutely means well. And I was kind of gutted that we didn't get to see more of her at the end, because she ends up losing him,
Yeah.
right? And we do get a little glimpse of her, but I was like, oh, who
Yeah.
did she bug after that? Because that's the big question. She was constantly after him. So who does she torment now?
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's another cozy fantasy story there where it's like after this timeline with Isha and Miria and the next generation of kids.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to keep an eye out for that. So I know we're at the hour and a half mark there. So and it's getting late as well. So how about we close out with a final question here. So I'm just going to take this banner off. But for everyone watching, whether it's now or later, what's something that you would recommend everyone pick up to read? What book, whether it's a standalone trilogy, fantasy, sci-fi, doesn't matter on genre. What's something you would recommend everyone give a try?
Hmm. Okay. I'm actually just looking here and then reading list of the books
Mm,
I've read this year.
I do the same. I can
Yeah.
never remember.
um. Okay. So okay, man, there's so many good ones. This is so hard.
Mm,
So, uh, I'll pick two answers then.
sure.
So the first one, which I read like maybe last week or something. So this November, I don't know. Okay, I put up some random videos which no one watches, but um, I mentioned in one of those that I wanted to do some wartime historical fiction this November because
Okay.
Remembrance Day and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
I read All Quiet on the Western Front, which was a reread. I read it a long time ago, but it was just so impactful. It really, really touched me, and to a degree where I think that people should read it. Like it's a very short
Mm,
book, but leaves a real punch, and it's one of those things where there's an authenticity to it because this was written by someone who lived through World War One, like back in 1929 or something. Where
yeah.
we're not going to get a story like this ever written again nowadays, right?
Hmm.
Like this was written at the time by someone, and it's just really powerful. So it's one of those books where it might not be like your favorite book that you had the most fun with, but I think that
Mm,
it is a worthy read, and it is one that people should read. So there's
mm.
that one, and then
Okay.
for a more traditional fantasy story, which I read on Esme's recommendation,
Oh
Asunder.
yeah.
If you read
Oh,
that yet,
I
yeah,
have it staring at me on my
yeah,
shelf, waiting to read.
yeah. So like I've loved so many good books, but I think this one is a little bit less known, and I think like it'll be good to get it some more recognition because it was very, very, very well done. Like just an awesome story that was really well told and very
Mm,
awesome characters, great plot. Like it's very well balanced, super world building. Yeah,
yeah.
really good book. So I think you're gonna love it whenever
I'm
you read it.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am, and I love to hear that because hidden gems like that are always lovely to find.
Mhm.
And to your All Quiet on the Western Front recommendation, there's another book very similar to that in what you described, which is Man's Search for Meaning, where it's written
Right.
by a psychologist who was imprisoned in Auschwitz.
Oh wow.
And
Yeah.
so he kind of explains from his perspective as of a psychologist what he notices in the behaviors and the mentalities of the fellow prisoners there and what it meant. And he goes on an entire uh, the whole thing is just his entire experience in the war camps and how his psychology helped him, but also how he viewed everyone else's experience and what that meant for them as a result of their mentality. It's very dark, but you'll never get another
Yeah.
perspective like that today, right? And it's a hard read, but very similar in that regard of just fascinating, but yeah, heart wrenching.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll definitely check it out. See, man's search for meaning, right?
Yes, and I think the last name is Frankel, is
Okay.
the author. I can send it to you after as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's a short book, but
Yeah.
even with it being a short book, it's a heavy read.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, it is getting late. We've talked about a lot of things. It's been a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for delving into all of that with me.
Okay. Thank you so much. Like, not just for inviting me on, but for reading my books. It is just an
Absolutely.
absolute honor and pleasure. I am such a big fan of your channel, and I
Thank
love
you.
all of your book takes. So the fact that you read my books in the first place, like, that means a lot. And then the fact that you enjoyed them, that was, yeah, it, like, you made my week.
You
Because, yeah.
the pleasure is absolutely mine. You absolutely earned it. They were memorable at this point. They're going to stick with me for a while, and I look forward to more. So please, please, please keep writing. And in the meantime, where can everyone follow you? Where can they find your videos? Get updates on the next novella coming out?
Yeah, so you just hit me up on my website. That's zammarahmer.com. That's just my full name.com. It's pretty straightforward. And then on YouTube, you can find me and on Twitter at ZOMG Fantasy. It's like Zom Fantasy.
I like it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, go check out the Book of Astea duology if you have not already, if you stuck through with us this far into the chat. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and maybe we'll get a follow-up one day,
Yeah,
follow-up chat for more.
that'd be great
In
fun.
Absolutely. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, everyone, and have a lovely start to your week.